Now that everybody is informed about the recording, I would like to welcome you once again for today's webinar. Just 1 second. You also see my slides now. I need to see, just give me a second. Okay. So today we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about, you may ask questions afterwards about the international dimension of EPDs, about validity, mutual recognition, and European collaboration. I hope that we're going to meet your expectations. If not, feel free to ask afterwards to send us some comments with questions, with ideas of what to include next time we talk about this topic. Okay, so for those of you who do not happen to know me, my name is Röder. I've been managing director of IBU for slightly more than 3 years now. And in the interest of everybody, I'm going to mute you all right now. If you have questions, I would like to ask you to write them in the chat and we'll come back later to them. Thank you very much. Okay. So what am I going to talk about today in detail? So I'm going to give you a short introduction to IBU and EPDs, because I assume that we are going to have quite a heterogeneous crowd of people participating today. So to give everybody some necessary background, then I'm going to talk about validity of EPDs. I'm going to talk about mutual recognition, and then finally about international collaboration. You may wonder what is the difference between validity of mutual recognition. I'm going to explain that as well, don't worry. So starting with the introduction of IBU, what is IBU? We are an association of construction products manufacturers, a voluntary association who started more than 40 years ago to think about what is the information that we need to provide about construction products to our clients regarding sustainability. Well, at that time, nobody was talking about sustainability. It was only about nature, about the ecological impacts, but it has evolved since then. Although, and in the case of IBU, we are still focusing very much on the ecological parts because we're talking about environmental product declarations mainly. So when I, the chair of our executive board, he likes to describe IBU as some sort of anonymous alcoholics in the field of construction products and sustainability. Not necessarily that what we're doing is has a negative context, but people have come together to help themselves solve problems that they saw coming up in the area of construction and the environment. We do have a number of members, and I'm very proud to say that we actually cover all major materials and product areas in our membership, which also ensures that we keep a very balanced approach to all the technical issues where we have responsibility for. What do we do? I think that is clear to probably everybody among you. We are a program operator for environmental product declarations. So we verify type 3 environmental declarations according to ISO 14025 and EN 15804. And we have an independent advisory board where we have a number of very well-renowned and very capable experts who support us in the with all technical issues, interpretation of the standards and things like that. So the mission of IBU is to create credible, consistent information on the environmental performance of construction products, particularly related to green building certification systems according to EN 5978, and also environmental related topics addressed by the construction products regulation. I'm not going to go into the CPR today. You may have seen the draft that was published at the end of March by the European Commission, in which indicates a significantly higher value for the EPDs in the future. And of course, communication to stakeholders is also very important. And if you wonder what does IBU stand for, you see it on the bottom right corner in our logo, Institut, Bauen und Umwelt, Institute, Construction and Environment. It's about us, we have around 230 members, out of which around 50 are national and international trade associations. From those 230 members, more than a third are international, a third and growing, I have to say. So the new members over the last years, they were predominantly non-German companies. And if we include all the companies that we represent indirectly via those associations, then we come up to far more than 3,000 companies that have access to our EPD program. We have around 300 declaration owners from, I think, almost all countries in the European Union. Also in Great Britain and Switzerland, Turkey, India, Malaysia, Thailand, US, and that doesn't include all the countries where our EPD owners come from. We currently have more than 1,300 EPDs published, not counting translations of EPDs. If, for instance, a company wants to provide their EPDs in several languages, that is possible, but we do not include them in this number here. So, having talked about IBU and mentioned EPDs a lot. So, what are EPDs? In a nutshell, an EPD is based on the life cycle assessment of a product. An LCA based on ISO 14040 and additional standards as applicable. In our case, this particularly refers to EN 15804, the European standard that I mentioned already before. And then we have, on top of that, a third-party verification of both the declaration as such and the background report, which contains additional information about how the EPD was calculated and prepared. We have additional information in the compared to a standard LCA, so technical information about the product, things like that. There is, which is particularly important, a common format, and there's a consistent set of rules. Because as we're going to see later on, it is very bit more important than in the case of a normal LCA that you are easily able to compare and to sum up EPDs that come from different sources, from different EPD owners, for instance. About EPDs in the context of LCA for buildings, it's very important to look about the building life cycle and the different stages that we have here. So what we call here the handover stage or the production stage. It's the production of the product in stages A1 to A3. So A1 is everything that is for raw material production. So in the case, for instance, of a ready-mix concrete plant, this would include, for instance, the production of the cement. Then you have the transport of the cement and other materials to the actual production site, the ready-mix plant, and then the manufacturing in that plant in stage A3. Then we have the construction installation, which includes then transportation in A4 from the construction site to from the manufacturing site to the construction site, and the construction, the installation of the actual building. Then we have the use stage, which is then further divided into a number of different processes: energy consumption, but also maintenance, repair, refurbishment, replacement. That all is included in stage B. And then we have the end of life stage, which is then the deconstruction of the building, the transportation to either a disposal site or a waste processing, recovering, reuse site, and the corresponding processes in those sites. And then something that probably also most of you are aware of, there's additional information. There are benefits and charges beyond the scope of the actual life cycle of the product, which is basically benefits that come from from recycling of the product and the end of its useful life. And then what do we do with those EPDs? These EPDs basically are the small little pieces with which we form the LCA, life cycle assessment of a complete building. So if you have a building, you take then the EPD information, the information about the production of the materials for the different materials that are there, be it mineral materials, windows, metals, wood, chemicals, whatever. You multiply the values from the EPD, you sum it up, and then you have, for the different life cycle stages, the total ecological impact. So for the production of materials, for the erection, for end of life, potentially you get all that information from the EPDs. Not always, but with the new standards, particularly the end of life stage is going to be much better represented in EPDs as well. But of course, an important part of the LCA of the building comes from the use phase, the energy consumption in the use phase for heating, cooling, transportation, etc. And that is not, this information does not come from the EPDs, of course. That is then something that is modeled typically in a separate process where you simulate the energy consumption of the building, and then that energy consumption is multiplied with the corresponding factors for the different environmental impacts. So that in the end, with the information from the EPDs and that simulation, practically have all everything ready for the complete LCA of a building. In order to provide that information, an EPD contains certain information. You see it here, no matter what that example is. But you first have after the title page, this gray sheet on the left, which contains important information about the EPD, and particularly also the signature of the verifier who verified the EPD. We have a description of the product, including technical information, and then of course the results from the LCA study, which is then really the core information that you need for the LCA of a building. Then before I come to the next point in the agenda, I would quickly like to talk about background databases, and you're going to see later on why. Those background databases, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept, but for those who aren't, And these background databases include the LCA data for inputs such as materials, energy carriers, or transportation processes. So say you want to build a very simple example. You are a small producer of windows with an aluminum frame, for example, and just to illustrate the concept. And then you have information about your own energy consumption, about your own processes, lots of more information there. But of course, in order to understand what is the environmental footprint of your product, you need to understand how much CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions in general are related to the production of the aluminum, of the glass, of the sealing material, whatever it is that you purchase and that you process in your plant. And this information typically comes from those background databases. There are two background databases available in Europe. One is Gabi by a company called Sphera. Many of you will still know that company as ThinkSnap, or even as PE International, as it was called long ago, just based in Germany, this company. At least their LCA branch, Sphera as such, is a US company. And an EcoInvent, which is run by the EcoInvent Foundation in Switzerland. And I have to say, both of these databases are of very high quality. But there are differences, and when you run calculations with different databases, you tend to have different results as well, particularly for less robust indicators. So in general, for energy, for greenhouse gas emissions, which are very much dominated by mass balances, there you see a very good convergence between these two databases. But when you talk then, for instance, about ozone depletion potential, when you talk about ecotoxicity and things like that, differences can be quite large. And as mentioned, we're going to come back to that issue in a moment. So with that, I would like to move on to the chapter of validity of EPDs. So the first question that probably most of you have is, where are EPDs published and IBU accepted? And I have prepared a map to show you that, and it looks like this. That's basically the situation. EPDs, there are no such laws that would forbid the use of EPDs in any particular country. And the experience also tells us that in many cases, an EPD published at IBU has been used already in a number of different countries and contexts. So we know that IBU, that our EPDs, even though they were not transferred to the, not under mutual recognition to the US system, to a program operator there, they were used in lead projects in the US. We recently published EPDs for producers in Australia and New Zealand, who need them for the local market, not for export into Europe or even Germany. So in general, the EPDs are accepted everywhere, and that is simply because we're talking about recognition. We need to distinguish here that it has two meanings. It can be accepted, it is valid in a given market or country. So it means the EPD can be used there, and then there is a question of formal recognition, where another EPD program says, okay, I accept those EPDs as equivalent to my own ones, and I'm willing to publish them without additional verification in my own database. And in the case of IBU, our EPDs, they comply with both ISO 14025 and EN 15804. And they are third-party verified, which means that they are accepted in general in all Europe and beyond. There are a few exceptions, very few. One is there may be local regulations that may define additional requirements, which means the EPD by IBU is not invalid, but it may not be accepted for certain, in certain contexts. I'm going to give you an example on the next slide. There are certain applications that may specify additional or different requirements. Also going to talk about this, and these are then also specifications that are quite important in a local context, particularly in Germany and the Netherlands. And then there may always be individual users who may have certain preferences or requirements. So if a user says, I want to have a consistent LCA of my building, and I'm going to build it on EPDs or information in general, data that comes from the Gabi database or that comes from the EcoInvent database, they may exclude EPDs based on other databases completely. But as mentioned, these are the exceptions. The rule is rather that EPDs are accepted without any boundary. Just as an example, in the beginning of the year, we had a verification of an EPD, a German producer who said, I need it for the Swedish market. He published the EPD with us without going through the formal mutual recognition process with the Swedish program operator, and it was accepted by Swedish authorities without any problem. Okay, so let's talk about the exceptions. The first one that probably most of you know also is France. There's a local complement to EN 15804 that specifies additional requirements, such as the France-specific transportation scenarios. They have to declare a much more complete life cycle compared to the minimum that is required by EN 15804. And then the end-of-life scenarios, they must reflect the current situation in France for the product in question. So if you have a product where you know in France currently it goes 30% into landfill, 40% into incineration and 30% into recycling, your end-of-life scenario in a French EPD must be 30% landfill, 40% incineration, 30% recycling. It also requires some health-related additional information, and then finally also the EPD must be verified by a verifier that is approved by the French program INES. That is currently the case, and we're going to come back to the case of France when we're talking about mutual recognition later on. Then we have a situation of Germany, which many people do not think about it. And here in Germany as well, all EPDs according to EN 15804 are accepted in general. But there is the BNB system, Bewertungssystem Nachhaltiges Bauen. This is the certification system for federal construction projects, also taken up in the meantime by some of the federal states. So the next lower level for their construction projects, and they have their own software, and that software they will only accept EPDs that have been uploaded to the EcoPlatform database, which needs some additional pieces of information, for instance, information about the classification of the product according to the EcoPlatform classification system. And these are all only EPDs that come from certain program operators, such as IBU. And a second requirement is that those EPDs need to be based on Gabi as background database. So if someone has EPDs based on EcoInvent, they can be uploaded to the EcoBauer database, but they are there stored in a separate silo, so to speak. And the ELCA software, which is the lifecycle assessment software that is mandatory to be used in the B&B system, this will not take these EPDs. And something that is important here, because when you say, okay, B&B, this is a relatively small system, there are a handful of projects that the federal level builds every year, and maybe, yes, okay, now with the state of Baden-Württemberg, the state of Berlin, maybe it's a bit more, but it's a very tiny fraction of the overall market. But it is very important to note that many DGNB auditors also use the same ELCA software, and therefore also are restricted to the same EPDs that are in the EcoBauer and that use Gabi as background database. And DGNB, you may know that this is kind of the private German certification system for sustainable buildings. So this is a significantly more important part of the in our okay, so let's move on to another country, which is the Netherlands. In the Netherlands as well, if you want to do an LCA of your project, you can use any EPD. That's not a problem. The problem is there are certain subsidies or tax breaks. Don't ask me for the details. But in order to get those, you need to demonstrate that your project beats certain benchmarks in terms of environmental external costs. And those are calculated then with the information based in the NMD, the National Environmental Database. And that one has, again, certain requirements, certain restrictions. So they require EcoInvent. They even go to as far as to say, okay, it has to be version 3.4. Their EPDs, the data sets listed there need to have all indicators according to EN 15804 plus A1 and A2. If you know the difference between these two versions of the standard, A2 being the newer one, you know that this is not necessarily a lot of additional work, but normally it's not integrated with all this information in one data set. And then you have additional toxicity indicators that need to be reported. And then again, the EPDs need to be verified in a program that is approved by the NMD administration. Okay, and then we have the United Kingdom, and this is a similar situation like in Germany, for instance. BREEAM consultants and the BREEAM database, and they use EcoInvent 3.2 as a background database. So if someone goes for a certification there, it will be difficult to work with Gabi data. Nonetheless, EPDs based on Gabi can be published in BRE's EPD program. So we've had this case a couple of weeks ago, and we asked them specifically, and they said it's no problem to publish the EPD in our program. But the usefulness on the ground will be limited simply because our own database for doing building LCA is based on EcoInvent 3.2. And then finally, a last very important application is LEED. You probably know LEED, Leadership in Energy Efficient Design. Probably the most popular building certification system internationally, run by the US Green Building Council. And there's a credit. It's one credit, but there are several points that can be earned related to EPDs. And the first one, which is in general far simpler to achieve, is that you get a point for simply using at least 20 products that are permanently installed in the building. And that come from at least 10 different manufacturers, and then you get 1 point. Important to note here that in LEED version 4, there is a discount for self-declaration or sectoral EPDs. So if you have a sectoral EPD for one of your products, then this product counts only half. And if it's a self-declaration, it counts only 1/4. There is now a new version of LEED, version 4.1, where there is a bonus for an external critical review. And that is a bit of a problematic step. I'm going to come back to that on the next slide. And then there is a second point under LEED version 4, where you get an additional, you get a point for improving the life cycle environmental performance of the project. So you demonstrate improvements via a life cycle assessment, and of course, in order to do a life cycle assessment, you need EPDs or similar data sets, but what else is there except EPDs? At least you need that for structural materials, otherwise you will not be able to form a meaningful meaningful life cycle assessment. And then, so this LEED credit for having EPDs in LEED version 4, which is currently the predominant version, it's relatively simple. You have compliance with ISO 14025 and EN 15804. This is sufficient. For EPDs published at IBU, they qualify without a problem. With that disclaimer that I already made before, if it's a sectoral EPD, it counts only half. In LEED version 4.1, which is currently optional, it's kind of in a test phase still, but individual credits can be opted in. So at the moment, investors, project managers, etc., who want to do a LEED certification, they can pick credit by credit whether they prefer version 4 or version 4.1, and they wrote in an additional requirement of a critical review, which is not the same as a verification. A critical review is much more related to kind of the peer review of a scientific article. So there are much less rules. It's very difficult to understand for me what is actually the intended additional benefit of requiring this. So it could be that EPD published at IBU may not qualify under LEED version 4.1. We need to see now how this is really implemented on the ground, because we have realized that even many professionals are not really clear about whether it really requires a formal critical review or not, or whether potentially the strict rules, the strict guidelines that we have from EN 15804 make a critical review actually redundant. Then the question of the lead credit for improved LCA. You need to know that if you do an LCA in the US, in that LCIA step, in the impact assessment, where you aggregate all the elementary flows, so flows of CO2 and methane, for instance, and laughing gas, into one indicator for global warming potential, that in the US, they use a different approach. So we have in Europe, it used to be CML. Now with the new version EN 15804 plus A2, it's a bit different, but it's clearly described in EN 15804 what is required. But in the US, they have Tracy, which is different. Some of the indicators are pretty much the same as we have them in Europe. So for instance, for global warming potential, but some indicators are defined in a completely different way. So for each, for ozone formation, for instance, this is the case. So European EPDs cannot be directly compared, which means that based on the inventory, so all the very elementary flows that you have calculated for emissions for resource use, you have to calculate a new results table in order to really use that EPD in combination with EPD specifically produced for the US market. But I mean, technically that is relatively easy because most, if not all, LCA software have this already implemented. So it's just a mouse click. You switch from one impact assessment method to another one. Two notes here. One is that I'm going to come back very quickly to this also when I'm talking about mutual recognition with the ULE, Underwriter Laboratories Environment. And also it is important to note that this, of course, does not only affect projects that are seeking LEED certification, but this can also happen for other projects, not only in the US, but that Tracy methodology may be used also in other countries by other in other projects by other planners, architects. Okay, we have come to the end of this section. Okay, there is a question here. Are there other programs in France next to INEAS? Because you said, for example, in your slides. Yes and no. There is another program, but there is a very clear distinction of which projects are, or which products are covered by one and the other one. And this comes really from the French regulation. These additional requirements for construction products. So if you need an EPD for the French market, you have to live with those additional requirements. As mentioned, there's another program operator which is called PEP EcoPassport, but they do only declarations for electric and electronic equipment. Okay, so let me go back to the presentation. We're coming to the next section, mutual recognition. Once again, I've tried to explain here what is the difference between acceptance, recognition in terms of the market accepts the EPDs, and mutual recognition as a formal process between program operators. So typically, this is a bilateral agreement between two program operators who consider that their EPDs are equivalent. And this equivalency goes beyond just the requirements of EN 15804. Otherwise, I mean, we wouldn't need those agreements. We would simply say, okay, you do 15804, I do 15804. So let's just swap our EPDs and boost our databases. So this is about the interpretation of EN 15804. It's about minimum qualification of verifiers where the program operators in general go significantly beyond the minimum requirements in the standard. And it's also about how the verification process is organized, whether there is a verification protocol, and whether the two are comparable in stringency and robustness. And then if there is such a bilateral agreement, an EPD from one program operator can also be published in the database of the other EPD program. There's also a new standard for mutual recognition, ISO 14029, but this is really new. It was published this year. So none of our mutual recognition agreements that we have at the moment at IBU mentions this standard already, but of course we have been involved. It was very much written also by our Swedish colleagues. So when we update our mutual recognition agreements, it shouldn't be a big deal to make sure that those agreements comply also with the requirements of ISO 14029. Mutual recognition agreements do we have in place? It's quite a number. There are eight agreements. I think we are, in that respect, the best connected EPD program worldwide. So they are written here in no particular order. EPD International, I think that was a pilot internationally. The mutual recognition between the Swedish program and us. Then there are a few other Scandinavian program operators, EPD Norge in Norway and EPD Denmark, which is run by the Danish Technological Institute. Already for quite some time, we've had a mutual recognition agreement with Underwriter Laboratories Environment in the US. There's an agreement with Global EPD in Spain. There's one with BRE in the UK. There's the one with INES in France. And then finally, the one with ICMQ EPD Italy. So how does it work in real life? And this is the standard process. There are a few exceptions that I'm going to explain on some of the following slides. So we're taking as an example here to make it clear who is responsible for what, that an EPD owner who has published an EPD with International EPD in Sweden, they want their EPD to appear in our database at IBU as well. So the first they do is they contact the IBU Secretariat here in Berlin and ask for the template for the so-called declaration of consent. The declaration of consent is a small document where the owner of the EPD simply states that he wants his EPDs to be published also on our website in our database. Then they prepare the documentation, which is the duly filled and signed declaration of consent. We need the original EP. Oh, sorry, it should read here from International EPD, not from IBU. So the original EPD from International EPD. Allow me to quickly correct that right now, otherwise I'm going to forget it. Okay, so sorry for that mistake. So they sent us also the original EPD, and important is that for mutual recognition, normally the receiving or both, particularly the receiving program, they specify that the declaration be in English or the local language. So in our case, it's English or German. If you go to EPD Italy, it has to be English or Italian. So that's another reason for publishing your EPDs from the very beginning in English, or at least also in parallel in English. And then we need a picture for the title page of the document that is to be published in our database. Then we publish it. Only the title page is changed. The rest of the document remains absolutely the same. We do not change the numbers. We do not change the formatting. We do not change the text. It's exactly the same. We provide an additional registration number. And there again, the original EPD number remains absolutely unchanged. I'm going to show you an example in a moment. And then the EPD bears the logos of both program operators. So in this case, IBU and International EPD. And important, the validity is that of the original EPD. So if you say, oh, our EPD in Sweden runs out in 6 months, let's publish it at IBU, and then it's available for another 5 years. No, I'm sorry. If you come that late, it will only be published in our database for 6 months until the validity of the original EPD runs out. So what does it look like? We have an example here from International EPD to IBU. On the left, you see the title page of the original EPD. On the right, then the transferred one. And you see here, first of all, I've put it a bit larger. So you then have here the publisher, which is the International EPD system, the original program. We have a program holder, Institut, Bauen und Umwelt e.V., which is the one who received it and who published copy in its own database. And then we have the registration number, which in this case is the number given by EPD. So it's MR EPD, but MR for mutual recognition, and ENV for EnvironDec for the organization running the Swedish program. And you still have the original declaration number SP00272, as also indicated on the left. And you also see here below, there are the logos of both programs, IBU and International EPD. So these are the general basics. This is the process that we normally have. Now, what are the exceptions? There are a number of exceptions, but in many cases, the slide looks like this. Very few text, because there's not a lot to be done. So if you have we're always talking about an EPD that was published at IBU and that you want to publish now also at a different program operator. So if we're talking about EPD Norge, you have to additionally prepare a self-declaration, meaning there's no verification whatsoever, a self-declaration regarding dangerous substances, CO2 from transportation, and indoor air emissions. And there's a template that the colleagues at EPD Norge will be happily provide to you if you are interested in publishing there. So that's already everything that we have to say about EPD Norge. When we're talking about underwriter laboratories in the US, there you need to provide that additional table with the results according to the Tracy impact assessment methodology. There's a template available also from ULE, and we need to have a quick look at the results to make sure that they correspond to what was declared in the original EPD published with our program. And there's another important thing here. This process is at least partly coordinated by the IBU Secretariat. So there, in general, you also talk first to the to ULE. They also have representatives here in Europe, but then at some point in time, we come in and support, particularly with the preparation of that annex, filling out of that template. BRE is then again very simple, just for you to be aware that if you want to have an EPD published in BRE, there is an additional check. It's not really a verification, but they check for certain formal aspects of your EPD before they publish the document. And then finally, in yes. This is not empty because there's nothing to be said, but there's so much to be said that I wanted to build it up step by step. So I mentioned already before, there are local regulations that require significant and very extensive amendments to an IBU EPD. In fact, the French annex to the EPD is almost as long normally as the original document, the original declaration. So there's, as mentioned, France-specific transportation end-of-life scenarios, additional life cycle stages, if they are not in the original EPD declared, health information that has to be provided. This annex needs to be verified by a verifier who's approved by INES. And then the EPD plus the annex are then uploaded to the French system. And here, this process is completely coordinated by the IBU Secretariat, or it used to be coordinated by the IBU Secretariat. There's a caveat, a very important caveat here. The French system currently migrates to EN 15804 plus A2, the new version. They realized that there is a new version of the of EN 15804. Actually, the very long transition period of 3 years was decided based on a request by France, and they wanted to have more time to change their laws, which sometimes specify for certain calculations EN 15804 plus A1. And now that by October 2022, EN 15804 plus A1 has to be withdrawn by all national standardization bodies, and we're expecting the French version of the standard with all the additional requirements to be available in around 5 weeks from now, around the 10th of July. We do not have information yet. The French program operator, it's very difficult to get access there to talk to them. Probably they don't have a clue either what they have to expect. On top of that, because at the beginning of this year, they implemented new regulation, practically requiring every construction product to have an EPD. That created a very high demand for EPDs and also for verifications. Like, there are currently not enough verifiers. Process is very slow at the moment, and there are wait lists. We've heard of waiting times of up to 1 year for verifiers to become available again for this. So in this situation, we now have 3 months get a if someone comes with a with an EPD that was currently already verified in the IBU system according to A1. To do this, we have long wait lists, so we will not be able to get the French annex verified by October 2022. That's very unrealistic. We can only do that in a number of projects where we were already able to plan that ahead. But for new projects, it's absolutely impossible to get an EPD according to EN 15804 plus A1 still verified to the French version of the standard. On the other hand, we are not yet able to support the process of migrating EPDs according to A2, simply because we do not know yet what the French version of EN 15804 plus A2 is going to look like. So the French complement. The core is going to be the same, just translated into French, but the complementary information, the complementary requirements will be much more are not available yet. And in that situation, we cannot perform any verification. So we had to take a decision and say that until further notice, we cannot support mutual recognition with France. As mentioned before, there are a few projects where we were able to schedule capacity with our verifiers before. Those people will know. But if someone comes now with a new project, we have to say, sorry, you first need to wait for the French French requirements to be out. Then it will take us some time to rework our appendix, our annex, according to those new requirements, and then we can see whether we will be able to restart the support for the mutual recognition with France. Okay, and finally, this was the hardest part. This is really the one where I have to say I'm very sorry. I have to give you that bad news, but there was no other way around it. We cannot at the moment, in good faith, accept any EPDs to be recognized by INEAS in France, simply because for the old standard we will not be able to do the work in time, and for the new standard we do not have the information. Now then, in ICMQ EPD Italy, there are no additional requirements as such. So you can take an IBU EPD, it just has to be, as mentioned before, in English or in Italian, and it can be published in their database as well. An important aspect here is that EPDs published in EPD Italy's database, they are normally accepted as documentation for the secondary material content under Italian regulations, but only under the precondition that the secondary material content is, first of all, clearly stated, and then the methodology is described. This does not have to be a lengthy article about how you did that. It can be simply a phrase, a sentence summarizing that we did a detailed mass balance of the processes in the plant, and based on that, we can say that X% of our product are actually secondary material. And if you find out that you would like to have this EPD, your EPD, in the Italian database, but you need to write exactly what is the secondary material content. You need to describe the methodology. this can be done afterwards. So you just simply get in touch with the IBU secretariat, and we can make those. We can discuss with you how to make those adjustments. Why is it important to be able to document the secondary material requirement? That is because there is a decree in Italy that requires a certain minimum secondary material content for public projects. And if you don't have an EPD, there are other ways to demonstrate it. So it's sorry, I was distracted because I was reading the questions in the chat. So the EPD is generally accepted as the easiest way to demonstrate the secondary material content. So there is a question of for France, it's not possible to get the mutual recognition, but are IBU EPDs still largely accepted by the market? To be honest, I don't have an idea. What we see is that everybody is at the moment trying to get EPDs for the French market, because even if individuals still accept them for the majority of uses where they are required, it will probably have to be an EPD according to French standards. Okay, then these are all the exceptions from that general approach that I outlined before. So what are the costs of the mutual recognition for the EPD owner? In most cases, it's a one-off processing fee. So if you want to go to international EPD, to global EPD Italy, it's you pay once 500 euros, and then for the rest of the validity of your EPD, you do not have to. There are no more costs. Likewise with EPD Denmark, EPD Norge, the one difference is that it's 100 euros more expensive. But there are exceptions. So in the case of INES, there is this verification plus processing. I have omitted the costs deliberately, because once we have the new version of the annex and everything, we need to review the whole process and see how much work is actually the verification, and then come up with a new fee for that. Then for BRE, the UK system, the check that they perform is 975 euros, and then there's an annual license fee of sorry, not euros, pounds, and then there's an annual license fee of 125 pounds. In the case of ULE, there's the verification of that annex, which is normally 350 euros. And then they have a standard annual license fee according to their schedule. And currently it starts at $156, I think, for one EPD, and then there are significant discounts for if you have more EPDs. So then at some point in time, would have to check. I think it's let me see. It's something like $350 for each additional EPD. Okay, good. So that was then the next part, mutual recognition. And we come to international collaboration. And this is mainly about the EcoPlatform. So the EcoPlatform is an association of EPD program operators. And the main roles that the EcoPlatform has is about harmonization, so global alignment of EPD, PCR. PCR is the product category rules. Most of you are familiar with the concepts, and these are the kind of the guidelines, the rules for preparing EPDs for particular products, to have common rules there. It's about harmonization also in the field of verification, common verification guidelines. It's about digitalization, where we have freely available digital product data in the form of EPDs via the so-called EcoPortal. I'm going to come back to that as well in a moment. It's about innovation. So hub for information exchange, competition, and new thinking, and a catalyst for proactive developments and advancements of solutions. So we're also trying to use this organization to kind of reach out to the market, to players, for instance, developers of tools for building LCA, to understand what do they need. Are they able to actually work with the kind of information that we are providing, or what is required in order for them to do so? Yeah. What does EcoPlatform mean for EPD owners? And I just realized I missed an important point here. So for you, it means there's a common understanding and commitment beyond EN 15804 concerning, for instance, the interpretation of EN 15804. A very recent example are common rules of how to treat green electricity. So you can use green electricity if you have guarantees of origin, but then it also means, in order to avoid double counting, that if there is no such if there's no such guarantee of origin, then you have to use a residual electricity mix, meaning then practically only the fossil fuels in the local mix. We have common verification guidelines. All that adds also to the credibility and the applicability of your EPDs as declaration owners. There is a data node to search all individual databases. Well, if I say all those that have already started to produce machine-readable EPDs, which are not PDF documents, but are XML documents, can be shown easily in a browser. It's a format called ILCD plus EPD, which is based on the ILCD format, which was developed by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission for LCA, but then it was further developed, this ILCD format, to adapt to the needs of EPDs. So there's more information, particularly about product description, background databases, and things like that. And then what is important for you also, I mean, all our EPDs are automatically eco EPDs, so they comply with the standards of the EcoPlatform, and they bear the corresponding logo. This used to be different in the past, at least in one aspect. In the past, also all our EPDs were compliant with the EcoPlatform rules, but not all of them were using the EcoPlatform logo. For, I think, around 1.5 years now, we have a different approach to that. It was also in the past that then those EPD owners who decided to have the EcoPlatform logo on their EPDs, sorry, they had to pay an additional small fee. And now we got rid of that fee, and we say all the EPDs that we publish are compliant with the EcoPlatform rules, so they are going to carry the EcoPlatform logo as well. I mentioned the EcoPortal node. This is what it looks like. If you go there, you can filter the database according to different criteria. You can search for particular products, product names, for languages, country or region for which they were developed, validity, the owner, meaning normally the manufacturer of the product, compliance, meaning EN 15804 plus A1 plus A2, program operator, etc., etc. And here you see we have you're going to see the EPDs published by Institut, Bauen and Umwelt, as well as those by MRPI and Dutch program operator. There are also international EPD from Sweden, the Norwegians, the Danish. They are all there, but only those EPDs that are already digitalized in a machine-readable format. And if you want to see this as a map, who is already or whose EPDs are already in that database. So it's of course us, EPD Norge, EPD Denmark. You see the countries here. There's also a small Spanish program operator who has started to upload information or to make available information there. But the big Spanish operator, Global EPD, they are not yet there. But there are a few more EcoPlatform members from, for instance, France, Switzerland, Finland, Slovenia, that we expect to be connected to that node in the future as well. With that, I'm already coming now to the end of my presentation. I have one slide, just some ideas, an outlook of what the future will bring in terms of international collaboration. We're going to see further harmonization, certainly, particularly in Europe. And there, the construction products regulation is a driver, and the European Commission is very interested in making sure that really an EPD is an EPD is an EPD. And it will be very interesting to see what is going to happen to the French concept in the future, if really the approach as outlined by the European Commission some 2 months ago goes forward. My personal perception is that we're going to have much less relevance of formal mutual recognition, because people will understand that, as just mentioned, an EPD is an EPD is an EPD. If an EPD can be found on the website of the EcoPlatform and their Eco portal, that means that it is equivalent to all the other EPDs published in that node. And talking about Eco portal, certainly digitalization, machine-readable formats, that is the future of the EPD. And as probably many of you already know, in the future, we're currently reprogramming our EPD online system. So in the future, all of our EPDs, all the EPDs published at IBU will be digitalized automatically. And actually, this is not just IBU, but this is a decision by all the program operators in the EcoPlatform, that in the future all their EPDs shall be available in a digital format. And yeah, some are a bit faster, others are not yet there. I mentioned it. There are a few program operators that haven't even started to digitalize their EPDs, but the software is there, the format is there, everything is actually there. And that's it. So thanks a lot for your kind attention. I haven't seen any more questions. We are a bit ahead of time. Well, actually, I can't stay until 4 o'clock because I'm there are a few maybe if you can write down them, there is one about, I'm going to read it for everybody, regarding harmonization on the topic of mass balance approach. EPDs, installation mainly, may using this method are not accepted by ANS in France. Are they accepted by IBU? Just to quickly explain for those who are less familiar with the topic, we're talking here particularly about biomass balance. So this means that basically you have a process in a plant where part of the raw material, well, let's take one step back, where typically something is produced from a fossil feedstock. So maybe from natural gas or any other basic chemical. And now part of that fossil material is replaced by biomass. Say you take 5% biomass because you have a consumer who is willing to take 5% of your production and who is willing to pay the normally quite hefty additional costs for the biomass feedstock. And in those cases, these processes run continuously. So you cannot say, okay, this is now a product that is really 100% biomass. It will contain 5% biomass, or 4.8, 5.2. It will fluctuate a little bit. And the biomass balance approach then simply means that you say, okay, I can declare 5% of my product in this example as being 100% biomass, and the other 95% are considered 100% fossil based. At IBU, we have been piloting this approach for a number of years. Our advisory panel said that, okay, we have developed a number of additional requirements of rules, guidelines for how to implement biomass balance in a way that we as advisory board feel comfortable that we can avoid pure greenwashing. So at the moment, yes, we do accept biomass balance. We have our own rules. One of them is that there is an approach. There is an EPD for not only for the BMB BMB product, so the one that is declared as 100% biomass, but there has to be another one also for the fossil product, and the BMB product needs to be clearly, or the BMB EPD, sorry, it needs to be clearly identified as an EPD using the BMB approach. Just to give you an idea of what our rules for BMB look like. There's a lot going on at the moment. It's discussed also in the context of standardization. EN 5941 for quality of EPDs. And of course, we need to see what is going to happen. We believe that this is a very valid approach that can open up additional ways of making production more sustainable. But if in the end there comes a clear statement in a standard saying that this approach is not acceptable, then we will also have to reflect that in our own program. I hope that answers your question, Remy. There's another one from Sandra Ricci, whether there's a mutual recognition between EPD, between IBU and PEP EcoPlatform, the second program operator that I mentioned in France for electric and electronic equipment. We do not have it yet. We had some first discussions with them. There's interest on both sides. There is also at a different level. There are there are developments going on, particularly at EcoPlatform. PEP has been a member of EcoPlatform for a number of years now, and there's a lot of work being close to finalization to kind of harmonize the two different approaches, because in the program operators, the traditional program operators and the EcoPlatform, they use EN 15804, the standard for EPDs for construction products. But for electric and electronic equipment, there is a different standard. And don't ask me now exactly what is the name of that standard, but there is a different standard. And there was a small working group that compared the two standards and came up in the end with some recommendations of how to harmonize them, which is basically if you have products that could fall within both categories, because in some cases, you know that if something is not permanently installed, it's not a construction product. As soon as you pin it to the wall with a screw, it becomes a construction product. So there are a few adjustments. The good thing is that the two standards are complementing each other. They are not contradicting each other. So there's not a rule in EN 15804 saying you have to do it in a completely different way than in the other standard. But because electric and electronic equipment, there the use phase is much more important for the overall LCA of the product. There, declaring the use phase is mandatory, which is not for a construction product. But then with a very simple adjustment, you can harmonize the two and say, okay, if you have these kinds of products which may or may not be a construction product or an electric or electronic equipment, well, you simply declare the use phase as well. So that's where we are at the moment. I think technically, it's not going to be a big issue, but we need to discuss the details with PEP EcoPlatform. Then one question: if you were an EPD owner and have an EPD made by IBU and valid until summer 2023, how would you manage it with INES according to your experience? Is it important to prepare future specific requirements from INES, or would you have to wait having a new valid EPD from IBU in summer 2023, for example, before going to INES? Yeah, in that particular case, I mean, if you have one, it's probably still to A1. Then you need to have a new one according to A2 anyway. And that's something that normally is significantly more work than just saying, okay, let's redo the calculation of the final results, because there are additional mandatory stages. So at any rate, you would most probably need an EPD according to EN 15804 plus A2, and then you can think about mutual recognition with INES. As mentioned before, if it's A1 at the moment, there is no realistic chance of getting that into the system before October 2022. Okay, and there is a question, Korean EPD recognition. No, we haven't made any progress there. We need to pick that up again. I'm sorry, we have a number of topics going on. We are drowning in work, and Korean EPD recognition has not been a key priority for us in the past, but we can pick that up again. I don't see any more questions. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I would very much like to thank you for being here, for your patience, for your interest. We're going to make the presentation available, as mentioned before. And if there are any other questions or comments that come to your mind after this webinar, feel free to drop us a line and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. So thank you very much and stay healthy. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.